everybody. My name is Lamoureux and welcome to my Capstone. Today I'm going to be talking to you about genetics and hereditary diseases. So first, I'd like to start with a question. What did you eat for breakfast today? Does anybody have any you want to into?
Oatmeal.
Oatmeal? Okay, that's good.
How about coffee?
Coffee?
Coffee. Red Bull.
Alright, well, most breakfast items, minus coffee, contain some kind of protein in them. Whether it's from wheat or from eggs or meat, protein is really found in a lot of foods that we don't necessarily consider protein rich. But now I'd like you to think about something else. What if you could not eat protein at all? Think about every meal that you eat and if you couldn't eat it because it had protein in it. This is the reality for people with PKU or phenylketonuria. PKU is a genetic disorder that causes the inability of the body to break down phenylalanine, an amino acid found in natural protein. It blocks their neuroreceptors, and that causes these individuals to fall behind mentally. So individuals with PKU or phenylketonuria can't eat protein, which makes their lives really difficult. So that brings me to my essential question, which is, how has hereditary disease research developed over time? So today I'm going to be talking to you firstly about the history of genetics, and then I'll move on to some current solutions about hereditary diseases that we have today, and then I'll be talking about the future and what we can expect from hereditary disease research, and finally I'll finish with a conclusion. So what did genetics look like in history? So the first ideas of genetics were purely theoretical, and they can date back to the time of Hippocrates and Aristotle. Both of these figures contributed to these ideas, but they had no proof behind what they thought genetics were. The first idea of real modern genetics as we know it today came from Gregor Mendel. He discovered how traits are inherited through generations in 1866. He had pea plants, and he was able to track how different colors of pea plants were moved through generations. Another person who influenced modern genetics a lot is Johann Friedrich Miescher. He was the first person to discover DNA and isolate it in 1869. However, back then he called them nucleic acids. So both of these people were very influential in discovering genetics as we know it today, and they contributed a lot to what we know. So genetic testing in history was a little different from what we do today, but it also influenced what we do today a lot. So the techniques are similar, however, back then they were a little less advanced. Firstly, family tree and learning people's genealogies was a really good way to track a hereditary disease or find out if somebody was susceptible to one. So doctors would do research on the affected's families, and they would do this by interviews with family or friends. And this is how they could track the heritability of a disease. So if they knew that that disease was prominent in the family from interviewing, then they would realize that that person might have a risk for having that disease. Another way they tested for hereditary disease in the past was with microscope analysis. And this is when they would count chromosomes in a patient's given cell, and they could tell if they had the wrong amount or if it was irregular. And this led to diagnosis of Down syndrome, Turner syndrome, and other chromosome-related hereditary diseases. Additionally, researchers would collect samples from patients, for example, urine, blood, or saliva, and they could perform different experiments on the samples. And this is actually how they first diagnosed PKU with a urine sample. So this type of testing works really well. Early treatment of hereditary disease was not very advanced. It's definitely nothing like we had today. Most people who had hereditary diseases that affected their mental state were placed in a home, and some diseases that were commonly found in these homes are Down syndrome and phenylketonuria, anything that really caused people to be intellectually disabled. So people in these homes were very separated from society. They didn't want them to go out in society and reproduce and spread their disease. But they would would learn to do rudimentary tasks like cook, sew, stuff like that, clean. And so their lives weren't terrible, but it still wasn't a great way to treat people who have hereditary diseases. As time evolved, so did our knowledge of genetics. Scientists were making advancements every day, and new discoveries were popping up everywhere. So there are a lot of influential discoveries that influenced how we know genetics today. Some of these are the Guthrie test, which is a way to test babies for hereditary disease, Sanger's method for estimating genomes, which is when you take a little bit of your DNA and then you're able to use that to predict what the rest of your DNA would look like, and then the Human Genome Project, which was a huge breakthrough in the world of genetics, which is where they are actually able to take a human's entire genome, which is like insane. It took a lot of money, a lot of time. And finally, CRISPR gene editing, which was only recently discovered in 2015. So how did those past discoveries and past testing, all those things we learned in the past, affect what we know today? So what do we use today? Firstly, as I said before, the Guthrie test. We still use the Guthrie test today, and it's used to test babies for PKU and other metabolic-related hereditary diseases. With the Guthrie test, a blood sample is collected from a baby's foot, and then it is sent to be evaluated in a lab. This lab is able to test babies for metabolic disorders, including PKU. Another type of testing we use today is called cytogenetic testing, and this is when chromosomes are checked for irregularity. So similar to the microscope analysis that was used in the past, this also uses a microscope. However, with more advanced forms of technology and microscopes, we're able to really see the chromosome structures rather than just the individual chromosomes. So this can show the structure of the chromosomes and if there's irregularity in them, which can show if someone has a hereditary disease. Another form of testing we use is called molecular testing, and this is when part of the DNA is taken, and that DNA is analyzed for abnormalities that could be caused by genetic disorders. So if you have a little allele or part of your DNA that's causing you to have a disorder, this type of testing can find that and show that that's what you have. However, this testing is really recent, so it's not used as much. And then many people probably know about Ancestry.com. It's the largest genealogy company in the world. So this is when consumers or the general public can buy this testing kit and take a sample, and then that is added into a database. Individuals are able to find out about their genetic heritage, history, and health with this test. And there are also many other similar companies, such as 23andMe. These at-home testing companies really just make it easy for everybody to learn about their genetics. My grandmother, as I was talking to her about my presentation, she said that she did do the 23andMe test. However, she thought it was interesting that when she was trying to figure out if she had the Alzheimer's gene, she had to go through many barriers and consent to learning that she had Alzheimer's. I just thought that was interesting because some people might not want to know fully if they're going to get a life-threatening disease in the future. However, some people that may think that submitting their DNA to a company like 23andMe might violate their privacy. So these testing companies also create an ethical dilemma. Tests might not be completely accurate from these companies, and they don't really make it clear when they're advertising their product to you. Additionally, they reinforce a lot of stereotypes about minorities and how specific hereditary diseases are connected to them. And also these companies, as I said before, aren't completely private. They might share your information with third parties, and this causes a security problem, especially if you want your DNA to remain private and your medical history. However, despite those setbacks, this testing is helpful. These tests are a huge improvement for hereditary disease treatment-wise. They can help people understand their risk for hereditary disease, even if they're not necessarily considering that as an option. So instead of going to a hospital to test for a disease specifically, they're actually doing it on their own, and this can raise concern, or this can raise awareness about the disease they might have if they didn't previously think they might. And due to the genetic database, this can also help relatives understand their risk as well. So if you have a hereditary disease and a distant relative also submits their DNA, they might be able to see that they have a risk from you, even if you hadn't specifically told them that you have that disease. So moving on from testing, there's a lot of current treatments that we use today that are really helpful for hereditary disease patients. Firstly, dietary management. This one sounds really simple, but it's very effective, especially for PKU. So if you think back to what I was saying before about PKU, how people who have PKU can't eat protein at all. Actually, if they don't eat any protein, especially while they're developing, they can completely live a normal life without any symptoms. So dietary management can really benefit patients a lot, and it can, and simply by changing your diet. So that's a really helpful way of treatment. Another way of treatment that we use today is tissue replacement, and this is when blood, bone marrow, or other tissue is taken from a healthy donor and transplanted into the patient who needs it. This is really common with sickle cell disease or sickle cell anemia, where the cells transplanted produce healthy cells for the patient. And this treatment does come with risks because the new cells that are transplanted can possibly attack the other cells in the body, and this is called graft versus host disease. So that would cause the patient to become sicker than they already are. But other than that risk, this treatment is really helpful. Finally, medication. This might seem obvious, but many hereditary diseases have medication that can help get rid of symptoms. Unfortunately, the medication that we use right now, it cannot fully get rid of a hereditary disease, but it can help greatly with the symptoms and getting rid of them. So the medication is really helpful, but it isn't a true cure. So what can we expect from hereditary disease solutions going forward? Will our use of technology improve? The answer is yes. We are developing a technology called gene therapy. And as I mentioned before, CRISPR gene therapy is a gene editing tool that has been developed. However, it's not fully advanced enough to completely change the world of genetics. So the clinical use of gene therapy is limited currently. The FDA has approved about 11 gene therapy options right now, and more are undergoing testing. So it isn't widely available to use, but there are a couple different hereditary diseases that can be treated through gene therapy currently. But further development of hereditary disease treatment further development of gene therapy would help hereditary disease treatment greatly, because this is completely changing your DNA to fix your hereditary disease and cure it. So it would be a huge advancement. However, there are some setbacks from gene therapy because it is very expensive. The benefits come at a really high cost, and the therapy that was most recently approved by the FDA, called LibMedley, costs about $4.5 million. So, as you can imagine, that's pretty out of reach for most people who might need this gene therapy. So, hopefully in the future that can be fixed and it can be widely more accessible. But looking forward, these future advancements such as gene therapy could improve daily life for people who struggle with hereditary disease and also change healthcare as we know it. Despite the very high costs associated with gene therapy, healthcare could actually potentially get cheaper with this advancement. Right now, I don't know about you, but with my mom as a doctor, I've spent a lot of time in ER, and I know how long some treatment processes are. People can spend hours in the ER just to get a treatment, but with gene therapy, you could have quicker and more efficient diagnosis, so therefore you'd spend less time in the hospital and have less of a medical bill. And these treatments would also be personalized for each patient. So everybody's different, everybody's body is different, and current medications are generalized for the public, but with gene therapy, it could be specifically made for your body and what you need. So that could be really helpful. And then obviously curing diseases that are currently incurable. There are many diseases in the world that just you can't really do anything about. So with the development of gene therapy, it's possible to cure those diseases. Finally, hereditary disease research has come a really long way. and there's still a lot to learn and discover. So I'm hopeful that the development of gene therapy will continue, and advances in research could bring us to a healthier future for humans overall. Thank you. Are there any questions?
How did you get interested in this topic? What inspired you to research this?
I don't know. I want to go into the medical field when I grow up, and I've kind of always been interested in that. So I took a psychology class last year, and they talked about like genetics and nature versus nurture, and that's what I was kind of interested in at first. And then it kind of developed in hereditary disease, but I'm really happy with where I came to. So.
As your mother, I don't think you've ever done something like 23andMe, but I was curious, would you consider it, and how would you go through that process of considering it for yourself or
Yeah.
advising someone else?
I think I would definitely consider it. I feel like it could be potentially dangerous with the privacy, but I also think the benefits might outweigh that security breach. But yeah, I would consider it. I feel like you should do research on which company you're going to use, because there are a lot out there and some might be better than others.
What'd you do for your March experience?
For my March experience, one of my slides, I accidentally have that in there still, but I actually researched PKU, and I interviewed my primary care provider, who has a patient also with PKU. So I just did a lot of research specifically on that disease.
How do you substitute protein
Yeah, that was
in your
very
diet?
You
You
ba-
can't eat protein at all.
Yeah, it's like very difficult. They have certain formulas that you can eat, but yeah, it's very hard for them to not eat protein. Because a lot of foods that I didn't even know had protein in them do have protein in them.
It seems like we're using gene therapy for reactive reasons to treat disease. Is it possible to use it proactively to change somebody, to make them even better? And is that allowed?
I mean, I think that's something that's been going on with like babies and like people creating their babies perfect. Or I don't know if that's like happened already. I've heard that's something that might happen. But I do think that poses a really big ethical dilemma, and like, should I change my baby to be exactly how I want it? Like, that's kind of, it's a big dilemma, like an argument, I guess.